All right, welcome. We're here at our live event for the Yukon Project.
Well,
Steve, do you have
thanks
a
everybody for
project
joining us.
for us to discuss?
Yeah, one of the things that caused us to start the Yukon project was when we had reviewed about 11 million TransUnion credit reports, right? Is
Yeah.
that about right? We started to find these nuggets, and we want to bring these nuggets to you so that you can learn from this. And today's topic is actually very fascinating, and we're going to be talking about credit utilization. And the case study we're going to walk you through today is a gentleman who went from 500 to 700 credit score in 8 months by making one phone call.
Yeah, and I just want to talk a little bit about that because I know that's going to sound gimmicky. It's going to sound crazy. This is real data. This is a real person, and what we're going to be able to do is show you what happened every 2 months of his credit report. We're not going to show you all the detail because there's a ton of stuff there. But what we're going to show you is exactly what he did in order to make a 200-point swing in his credit report, his credit score. That's amazing if you think about it. Because to your point about kind of credit scores and credit reports, we all really only have access to our credit report. And so we often see it and we think we understand how it works because we're looking at our own credit file month after month and we see things move. And so we
Now,
automatically assume we get it. Or we read a couple of blogs with graphs and we think we understand it. But one of the things that we really felt strongly about is if we literally looked at 10 million files, we would be able to see what's really going on and at what's really going on at different credit bands. And that's why we're kind of excited to share with you some of the things that we've learned from that analysis.
yeah, and just to be clear, this isn't the only example we found of this, but we're only going to focus on one. We found many
We found
exactly like.
many, and the principle is statistically pure in terms of exactly what we're seeing. But we figured it would be far more powerful to pull one person out and show you literally what happened.
Well, let's get into it. And so we're going to spend the next few minutes and we're going to unpack this for you and we're going to show you how to do this. All right, let's go.
And the key is utilization. Believe it or not, this instance it's all about utilization, but we want to talk a little bit about what that actually means because utilization, if we don't understand what utilization is, we can't possibly understand the principle of what's going on here. And so the most important thing for us to kind of start out with is understanding that utilization is the percent of your available credit that you are currently using. That sounds pretty fancy. And what does available credit mean and what is currently using meaning? But we're going to get into that with a very simple example.
And what's interesting is I think what we're going to show today is these are real numbers, but this is also what happens when you start out in your credit journey. You don't realize some of these things.
I think that's really important thing to keep in mind is, and whether it's important or not, I'm not sure, but Logan is early in his credit journey. So he doesn't have a ton of different credit files. He doesn't have a bunch of different forms of credit. And so he's early on and that allows him to do what he's doing. But when we're talking about utilization, let's talk about that. So this is a hypothetical situation. Let's say you have one credit card that has an available credit limit of $1,000, which means you can only charge $1,000 on this thing before they cut you off. And that's your total available credit. Well, if you have a balance of $500 on that $1,000 credit limit, you've got a utilization of 50%. $500 divided by $1,000. And here's what I want to make sure that we're clear about. This is one credit card. If I have two credit cards and one of them is at a $500 credit limit and the other is at a $500 credit limit and I've maxed one out, My total utilization is still 50%, right? Balance of $500 on one card, a total available credit of $1,000 across two cards, that's 50%. But the reason I think that's important is because it's important to realize that we're looking at your total revolving credit. And revolving credit is like a credit card. I can charge on it, pay it off, charge on it, pay it off. The other thing to keep in mind is if you do have two credit cards, like that one circumstance where you've maxed out one and one you're not using at all, and so you still have a 50% total utilization, that's still not going to be as good for you as if your balances were even across your credit cards. Meaning you've maxed out one card, that's going to actually hurt your credit score more than if you had $250 off on both cards. And let me tell you why, because that's a really important point, is the credit score is actually trying to predict your likelihood of defaulting. Now, if you've maxed out a credit card, the credit scoring agencies kind of look at you and say, hey, there's a chance you're going to default on that particular card. They don't care which card you default on. They're trying to predict default. And so if you've maxed out one of your cards, you're more likely to default. And so your credit score is going to come down a little bit. And so, Steve, do you want to clarify it all? Have I made things more complicated or less complicated in understanding utilization?
I think it's better if we actually just get into the next phase of this and we start to show people a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, so here is the thing we want you to learn, and we're going to show it in action. Every 10% of your utilization means 10 to 15 points on your credit score, which means that if you drop your utilization 10 percentage points, you should see a 10 to 15 point improvement in your credit score regardless of where your credit score currently is.
Over what period of time? So you drop your 10% of utilization. When do you see that bounce?
Almost immediately. So if I drop my utilization from 50% to 40%, next month, when the credit bureaus report that to the credit bureaus, I should see a 10 to 15 point improvement in my credit score, regardless of whether my current score is a 550 or a 750.
Great. All right.
In fact, let me just make sure that we are really clear. Let's say you have a credit utilization of 80% and your credit score currently is 640. If you bring your utilization down to 60%, so you've dropped it 20 percentage points, you can expect to see your credit score go up probably between 20 and 30 points the very next month. That's pretty cool. And there's not a lot in your credit report that has that direct a relationship, but credit utilization is. And that's why at the Yukon Project, we don't keep parroting back this idea that your utilization has to be under 30%. Because the reality is, if your utilization is 50% and you move it to 40%, you get that same 10 to 15 points. If your current utilization is 30%, you may look around and say, hey, look, I'm good. Everybody says 30% is perfect. But if you move it down to 20%, you will improve your credit score 10 to 15 points.
And here's one of the biggest things I've learned is, and Jonathan said this early on, is at the reporting date. You may think you are paying off your credit card or paying it down, but you do it after the reporting date, which means when they report your credit utilization, you're not actually getting the benefit of what you're doing. So you need to pay attention to that.
That's a really important point because utilization doesn't mean debt. It can mean the balance you're carrying. All it means is the balance that is reported at the time that the entity is reporting your utilization. And so I think that's really important. Usually it's the statement. And that's why one of the other tricks that you can do to lower your utilization is to make your credit card payment twice a month instead of just when it's due. Because then you're going to have the amount of balance, even if you're paying it off in full every month.
And just to be clear, we're not saying pay more. We're saying more frequently break up your payments.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into Logan and show them some real data.
All right.
And exactly what he did, the secret to literally reducing the potential interest rates he pays by 100%.
Yeah.
like cutting it in half.
So this is Logan. It's not his real name, but this is real, honest to goodness credit data from TransUnion from a real credit report. So what we want to do is kind of show you what he did. And he started out with a credit score of 548. 548 is not great, right? When it comes to a 548, you probably can't get, well, you definitely can't get a mortgage. You can't get a car loan. You'd be hard pressed to get any kind of a personal loan. And if you did get a personal loan, it would be very expensive. So a 548 puts him in a situation where he may not even be able to get an apartment.
Can you use real numbers versus very expensive? Tell people like what that means in real interest rate. So if you're at a 548, are you paying 30% plus potentially on a personal loan?
No, you're paying 160%, and you're probably only being approved for at the most a couple of $1,000 because it's going to be a short-term loan, because the lender is not really confident that you'd be able to pay it over time. And so these are short-term loans, limited balances, and very expensive.
And again, remind people, if you have over a 700 on your credit score, that interest rate goes from what to what?
Well, with inflation the way it is right now, and the interest rates where they are, it's probably in the neighborhood of 8%. So that gives you an idea of just how dramatic it is. You're talking about saving not just hundreds, but thousands of dollars of interest expense if you can move your credit score from the 500s to the 700s.
All right. Well, let's give people the magic of what Logan did.
All right. Check out Logan's credit score over time. So this is capturing data every 2 months of Logan's credit score. And you can see that he starts out at 548. And you can see that almost immediately by month 9 or 8 months into this journey, he's up to 720. And then he's able to maintain between a 720 or a 680, that band, for the next 10 months. And so fairly consistently. And so what we really want to know is, what did he do from month 2 to month 9 that got him there?
He must have changed a lot. I mean, it must have been many things he changed, right?
Well, Logan made a phone call.
Made a phone call, folks. One phone call.
So Logan made one phone call and moved his credit score from a 580 to a 720. But let me walk you through how we know that. So check out this. The dotted line is his credit utilization. And you can see that he had a credit utilization of above 90% for the first several months. And then all of a sudden it magically dropped to about 24%. And what I think is
he must have made a big payment.
So let's talk about this, because one of the things that we can be sure of in that early slow decline is that he's making his minimum payments to his credit card. And we know that because the balance is coming down at a very consistent rate, and he's making that payment every time. And so you can see that if he just continued the way he was going to eventually pay off his credit card, but it was going to take several years because that slope is not very steep, right? So let's find out, how do we know that Logan didn't make some big payment against his credit card and therefore solve the problem. And if you don't have the money, then it's hard to do that. Well, this is Logan's balances on his credit card. Check that out. It is fairly consistent, and that slope hasn't changed. So his balance isn't changing at all during the time when all of a sudden his utilization collapses.
One thing I'll point out with Logan that he did correctly is he didn't get behind. So
yes,
he didn't get behind. He paid the minimums. He was working on it. He had good discipline. So that was phase one. But that's not what caused him to go from 548 to over 700 in the blink of an eye.
And that's a really
one
important
phone call.
Yes, and I think that's super crucial because he was making improvements to his credit score because he was staying on time. So let's take a look at that. So check this out. His utilization and his balance seem to be awfully in line, which means that his credit limit was $1,000 until month 9. We know that because his utilization and his balances were right in line. And then in month 9.
And just to remind everybody, we actually have the TransUnion credit score data. So we actually have the raw data. So this isn't us. We're actually getting the raw facts, looking through the data to give you these insights. This is real stuff, not made up, not by somebody just dreaming it up. And we have many examples exactly like this.
Yeah, this is a real guy, and this is real data. And what I think is fascinating is in month 7, Logan does something, and it certainly wasn't paying off his loan. What's that?
Makes a phone call.
Logan makes a phone call in month 7, and that phone call drops his utilization from 90% to 24%.
And what was the phone call?
So Logan picked up the phone and called his credit card and said, "Hey, listen, I've been paying on time very consistently. I only have a credit limit of $1,000. Will you increase my credit limit?" And that credit card gave him a credit limit of $3,500. And so all of a sudden, $800 on a $3,500 credit limit drops that utilization to about 24%. And you'll notice that one of the things Logan does very well, he raised his credit limit and he did not increase the amount he owes. So one of the temptations is to raise your credit limit and then start charging again. And Logan does not do that. He just continues to make his payments. And you can see that line continues to go down a little bit. But the dramatic thing was that his utilization collapsed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot with this. Phase 1 for Logan, make your payments on time, pay the minimums, build some trust with your credit card, which means first you have to have a credit card. Second of all, don't be afraid to ask. Credit card companies understand. You don't owe them anything. You shouldn't be afraid to ask. Ask them. They understand how credit works, and they actually want to help you, because if they help you, it will help them in the long term.
The worst thing they can say is no. But in Logan's case, they said yes, and it dramatically improved his credit score. I mean, this is going back to that graph we saw a little bit earlier. You can see that his credit score was improving because he had a history of on-time payments. He was making the on-time payments. He wasn't missing a payment, and so his credit score was coming up. But the dramatic jump and staying up is because he dropped his utilization.
So let's wrap it up, because this is such an important point. We don't really have a lot more to say besides make a phone call. Where can they find the phone number to call? Where can they find that? That's important. Where's the phone number?
You probably, almost certainly you can find it on the back of your credit card, but you can also find it on your statement.
Exactly. So if you have a low credit score and you are making your payments on time, step number one, call your credit card and get them to increase your credit limit.
That's right. And step 2, continue making your payments. Do not use that credit limit, because if you use it, your utilization is going to go up again. So don't use whatever they give you. Even in emergencies, do what you can to make sure that you have your savings on the side so that you don't have to increase your utilization. And if you do that, you will see an immediate jump in your credit score.
Yeah, what an amazing toolkit if people just understood the ins and outs of how credit scores were built, which hopefully over time we will be able to demystify and help people so they can literally lower your interest rate payments, lower your debt payments, because that puts more money in your pocket. Then use that money to pay down your balances and get out of the pressure of having debt. Use the tools that are there for your benefit.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because what a lot of people talk about this idea of, hey, credit score is just a way of getting you into debt. Don't play the game, right? You hear that a lot. Don't play the game and you're going to be fine. The reality is, this is the game you're forced to play, right? If you need to find an apartment, they're going to check your credit. If you need to rent a car, they're going to check your credit. If you need insurance, they're going to check your credit. So you can tell yourself all day long that you want to opt out of the game, but the game is tightly enmeshed in everything that we do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. What's going on is society is trying to find a way in order to make a lot of these financial tools available to everyone. And the only way they can do that is to have a system like credit scores and credit reports that can be standardized across everybody. So even if you're never going to borrow money again, you owe it to yourself to maintain a good credit score. But if you are going to borrow, if you need to borrow for your next car, if you want to buy a house, in both cases, it will always be more expensive for you. And we're talking hundreds and thousands of dollars. And in a case of a house, tens of thousands of dollars more expensive to you to take out that loan with either no credit score or a low credit score.
Yeah. What a great data set to go through today. Thank you.
It was fun, and we'll probably do another one. Maybe we'll pick out a different one and we'll find a different principle other than utilization on the next one. But we are glad you join us for this live event. But remember, you can play the game and you can win.